So today we will be talking about student reflection. So this may or may not be a new concept, but we're going to dive in and then we'll have a chance to talk about it together and in breakout rooms later. So today, these are the items we're going to cover. What is reflection? Why is it important? And how do we do it? So reflection kind of could be defined in different ways, but for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about today, in education, reflection is the act of thinking critically about one's learning. So that's what we are going to be talking about today. And more specifically, so students could consider the content that they are learning and think critically about the content and processing the new information that comes with that. But then there's another piece to reflection that we're going to focus more on today, which is students kind of meta-analyzing their learning process and thinking about how they learn and what's working well, what's not working well, and why. So today we're going to focus on that second type of reflection. So reflection on how my language learning process is going. Okay, so let's do a quick group poll. Please type your answers in the Zoom chat. There's two questions. Number one, how often do you already ask your students to reflect on their language learning? So you can share a letter or share the amount of time. And number two, please describe a typical reflection activity that you might do in class. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, seeing a range of responses so far. Once a week, never, often, from time to time, every day, once a week, daily. Okay, so some typical reflection activities might be as a form of feedback. So maybe a discussion with the students. Another way someone mentioned is giving a weekly quiz and kind of talking about the topics. Asking students questions about the exercise, like, was it valuable to you? What did you think? How do students feel about certain reading or listening passages? Okay, good. So all of these are, valid answers. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way, but today we are going to be encouraging you to add in reflection into your classes, and I'll give you some tips on how to do that in a practical way. So let us continue. Okay, so here is a monkey looking at its reflection in the mirror. So it's seeing what it looks like, right? So with this term reflection and using reflections in the classroom, it gives students an opportunity to look at themselves and see what they really look like in terms of being a language learner. So reflections help them to get a sense of themselves, build self-awareness, and gives them a realistic look at where they are in their language acquisition process. And this involves critically thinking about what they are learning and their strategies for learning. So why is reflection important? Well, if you have a group of students, each of them can reflect individually about their own language process. And, students may have different strengths and weaknesses. So by incorporating reflection into the class, it promotes a student-centered environment, which is what we're going for anyway. And as mentioned before, it creates self-awareness. It helps adults to make connections between, like, I'm learning this or I'm choosing to study in this way, and that is affecting my learning in this way. Can help them make connections between their strategies and the results of that. It can also help learners to see how their learning is relevant when they sort of take a step back from the actual learning and they're given a chance to process the learning process. So it also becomes a dialogue. It's like a back and forth conversation between the student and instructor, and you have the privilege of being part of their language learning journey and encouraging them along the way. It also puts more responsibility on the students for their own learning. So they're not just receiving information from you and learning it because they have to, but it builds that self-awareness and helps them to see that what they are doing in the language learning process is making a difference in how they are learning. So some examples of reflection might be like a student might realize, oh, I'm studying vocabulary for only 5 minutes a day at home. Let me change that. Let me study for 20 minutes a day at home and see if that helps my vocabulary acquisition. Or a student might realize through reflection, through having reflection opportunities, that they're a visual learner, and maybe looking at pictures helps them to understand or remember vocabulary in the target language. And then you get to use that information as an instructor. You can follow up with students about what they've said with their reflections, or you can change your teaching to help the students learn in the way that works best for them. It can also help you to see like where students might have an area of confusion or where they might be stuck. And then you can give them strategies or talk about it with them and help them through that stuck time. Okay, so some questions might be like, how often should we do reflections? Well, research is not conclusive on how often reflections should happen in the language classroom. So research does show that reflection is a positive piece of the language learning journey, but there's no like super clear recommendation. So my own recommendation based on just like pedagogy and what preparation I did for this presentation is if reflection is not currently a part of your teaching at all, I would aim to add reflections once a week. So we'll talk more about how we can do that. And some ways could be having the students reflect after a major assignment or presentation, because that can tend to take a lot of effort from the student and they're using a lot of different strategies to study or prepare. So that can be a good time to do it. Another aspect of doing reflections is that they could be verbal. It could just be a conversation, a check-in with the student, just talking to them, or it could be in writing. It could be a homework assignment. It could be done in semi-autonomous time. One note is that you don't want to rush through a reflection. You want to provide enough time, but there's also no need to drag it on. So that could mean that a reflection is given different amounts of time depending on the type of reflection. So if you're just like, how was that homework for you yesterday? That could be like a 30-second check-in and reflection. Or it could be more intense where the student has to like write out a paragraph of their language like learning process or the strategies that they used in order to complete an assignment. So again, feel free to assign reflections as homework or for semi-autonomous time. And then you can even, like later down the line, you can even reflect on the reflections. So for example, at the end of the week or near the end of the course, especially if this was something that they wrote, then it could be a way for you to help the students to see, oh, wow, you've improved a lot, or you've gained so much in the last few months. Look back at your reflection that you did, from April or whatever, and then they can see their areas that they've improved. So in some textbooks, there may be some kind of reflection, and that's great. However, I did like a little sampling of a bunch of different language textbooks to try to find, what were the textbooks doing with reflections. And I did not really find the types of reflection questions that we're talking about today. So um, some textbooks might have like a checklist for what they can do in the language. This is from a Chinese textbook. And that is good. That does involve reflection because it gets the student to see, okay, can I exchange basic greetings? Can I say my name in Chinese like that? Um, but that's a little bit more like the asking questions to reflect on language content. And it doesn't quite go as deep into the critical thinking about students' language learning strategy. So let's talk about that. Okay. So here is a way that reflections could be integrated into a lesson plan. And I know like not all of the classes are Monday through Friday, and there's different lengths of time for classes and all of that. So this is just absolutely just a sample, just an example. So it could be different lengths of reflections like we discussed, right? So maybe on a Monday you will be like, okay, tell me about your homework over the weekend. What strategies did you use to complete, like learning strategies did you use to complete the assignments? And that could be just a 5-minute like discussion with the student, maybe 10 minutes. Then another option could be to, midway through the week or toward the end of the week, ask the student to reflect on their performance this week in the language classroom. How do they feel like it's going? Where could they improve? Things like that. And then maybe if you have a presentation that the student does, ask them to reflect after that. That could be a discussion with you, or it could be an assignment that they do and then come back and talk about. You may also need to adjust the reflections and like based on who the student is and what works for them. So it could be that students respond differently to different types of reflections. And again, they don't need to be intense, but they should make the students think critically about their language acquisition process. So we're going to get a little more specific now and talk about actually different types of reflections. So critical thinking is important for all students, right? But it's especially meaningful for adults who they really need that understanding of how their studies are relevant to their work and life, and that provides motivation. And critical thinking is going to happen at all levels of reflection. These are some different types of questions that could be asked to get students to reflect. So asking students to analyze their learning styles or study habits or other aspects of the language acquisition process helps them to make connections between what they're doing to study and what they're actually learning. And then having that reflection enables them to then, move forward or pivot with a different strategy, try something new. So one thing to know is that this is not necessarily something that the students will know how to do, right? Especially if it's a new concept for some of us, including me, right? Like this, in reflections would need to be explicitly taught to the students. So it's okay to tell the students like, okay, we're going to reflect now, and then use prompts or sentence starters to get students to finish something rather than just telling them, okay, reflect on that. That's too vague, right? So we want to be more specific by asking them a specific question to reflect on, or, letting them kind of finish a sentence with their answer, especially at the beginning when it's new to them. So, like we mentioned, it could just be a conversation or it could be a written thing. But a key piece is that the students get feedback from you about their reflection so that it becomes a conversation. And hearing from you, your perspective, your opinions, feeding back to them will also be valuable for their learning and motivation. And you might be able to offer insight into their learning process, especially if you've seen them, for a long time, or maybe share a new learning strategy that is going to help them. So staying open-minded and non-judgmental is key in the reflection process. And that's both for student and instructor, right? So we don't want students to be like, oh, I'm so dumb. I only memorized, 5 vocabulary words or whatever. We don't want them to get discouraged necessarily, but then also from the instructor perspective, we're trying to build a conversation with students about their language learning process. So we want it to be a comfortable environment for them to share how that's going for them. And then try to incorporate reflection throughout the course. It should happen regularly because there's always going to be new things that they're learning. So there's new things to think about, and different phases of the language acquisition process may bring up new things for them to consider or might require them to adopt a new language learning strategy. And then those things can be discovered through reflection. Okay, so some specific prompts for student reflection. And this webinar will be made available to you on the LMS by the end of this week. So you can refer back to that for any of these prompts later. So it could just be, like a 3-minute pause, like a little check-in with the students, asking them, what are you more aware of, as a result of X? And that could be as a result of today's learning or as a result of this unit, or after you've started incorporating this learning strategy, I am more aware of blank. And then these are also similar questions. I was surprised about, I related to, I felt blank. And these are some sentence starters to help students identify strategies. So asking them to answer what's been working for you with your study habits, or putting something specific in, like what has not been working for me with learning proper pronunciation, or what has not been working for me in, learning how to type in the target language. So that can help them identify what they want to pivot away from. Or a new way I'd like to try learning X, Y, or Z is blank. And then you give them the freedom to think of a new way of learning. And then that, again, brings it back to student-centered and puts the responsibility on the student, making them more motivated because they're the ones that will be thinking of it rather than you telling them what to do. So some other questions could be asking the students to reflect back. So how did that activity go? What went well? What didn't go well? Why? Or looking inward, like what did you learn or how did you feel and why? Why can kind of take it to the next level deeper. Or looking forward, what would you do differently? What would you change next time? And action. So what are you specifically going to do as a result of what you found out about yourself? Okay, so it could be a little tricky to know what language to do reflections in. So DLS's recommendation would be that for beginner students, so like ILR 0 to 1, you would do it in the student's native language, which is usually in English. And then for intermediate to advanced level students, you can do it in the target language. And when you do reflect in the target language, it really makes reflection a centralized part of the class. And then it's still them practicing the language, right? It's not something completely separate, it's integrated into the curriculum, basically. So an important piece, since reflection may be a new concept to the students, or it may be difficult for students to speak at a critical thinking level in kind of an abstract way in the target language, there's going to need to be scaffolding that the teacher does. So, for example, using sentence prompts like from the previous slides, just in the target language. You give the student a starting sentence and then they can finish it with their words in the target language. Or maybe a vocabulary word bank, something like that, that will allow students to have the tools that they need, a little bit of help from you, to be able to talk about it in the target language. And then as reflection is continuing to be part of the class, then they will get more comfortable with it as it goes on. They might learn, certain terms that they can keep using, or they can keep expanding as well. Okay, it is breakout room time. So I want you all to notice, of course, the reflection in the photo here. So the metaphor continues, but there's 2 questions for the breakout rooms. Number 1, how do you already include reflection in your classes? Talk about, what works, what doesn't, any ideas to offer. And then think about what we've discussed in this webinar today and the different types of reflection ideas we've given, and choose one. So what reflection activity will you include in your language classes in the next week? All right. Any questions about what you're doing in the breakout rooms? All right. Well, I will create some breakout rooms and then you guys can discuss for 10 minutes and I'll bring you back after that. All right. All right. Welcome back. From what I heard, you guys were discussing at length and had some really interesting thoughts and opinions. So I would love to hear from you guys. If you would like to share, please raise your hand on Zoom, or you can physically raise your hand and I'll call on you. So that's one way we can, feel free to share verbally, or if you just want to put a comment in Zoom chat, I will keep an eye on that as well. So let's discuss just any insights, or interesting things that you guys discussed in your breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Okay, Tigist.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'll try to go so that I don't forget. And team, please, if I miss anything or misinterpret, help me out. So since you have asked something surprising that we have discovered, I may say that our team has mentioned that we instructors already do some reflection. It's just we haven't given it a name of it being a reflection. Right. And one way we already include reflection in our classes, in our team, was the first one is, let's say, after completing a task, we would ask the students how did they find it? Did they enjoy it or not? And how we can change it or improve next time. And also, let's say after reading a text, we would ask them how did they find the level of the text, perhaps. And for the second question, what activity will you include in your class next week? We have got 2. The first one is reflect on reflection of the student. One teammate said. And also the second one was to reflect together with the student by giving them the prompts, such as, I am now more aware of this when I do that. Or let's see, I am surprised about having learned this about me. Something like that.
Yeah, thank you,
Hopefully that
Tigis.
answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think the value of asking students to reflect on an assignment or on the ILR level of something can give you as a teacher insight into like the mentality of the student. Yeah, so even if the student doesn't realize that they're reflecting, that's kind of a way to get them to reflect. So thank you for that. Natalia?
Hello, everyone. I will speak on behalf of my group. If something wrong, please add. So Olga shared with us a very good example when she asked Olga Weish, not Olga Sanson. Very good example when she asked at the end of each lesson how the student feels. Was it difficult or was it easy? She shared how she feels about progress, and Olga gave us a very nice example. I believe it's a very good example when teacher show appreciation of the very good new word in Russian because she teaches Russian, or like in Russian words. So it's a very, very nice to hear when reaction is on the target language, I believe. And I think that reflection has to be in a system, systematical reflection. It's a very good reflection. And at the end of the lesson, of course, I am adding just a little bit different questions. What was fun and what was boring? Usually it shows not about fun and boring, but what was really difficult, right? They're thinking, oh, it was boring. And what was easy, that what they knew already. And I believe it's a very good try to give an exercise on the first day of the week and the same exercise at the end of the week. During the week, they did so many other exercises, so they usually forget, and maybe in the middle of the repeating exercise, they're saying, oh, now I can do it. I'm doing this faster. I'm doing this better. I'm doing this more correct way. So, and this kind of good motivation for them, they did some progress during even this 1 week, so they will do more. And when it's in a row, can you imagine, 1 week is success, second week is success. So they're very motivated to continue on the next week. It's very nice. And of course, at when I see when mood is going down or it's at the end of the course, we are reflecting based on the description of the level from ILR. So students can read what kind of cognitive activities they has to do on a target language, and he or she knows that they can do it. It's even more good motivation, such a reflection for a good test, and no nervous at all to go and just show their knowledge. So self-reflection is the best reflection.
Thank you, Natalia. Anyone else? Veda? You're still muted.
There we go. So in our group, I started by saying that since after having worked in elementary school, that some of those questions seem very similar to what we use in teaching children. And I think we have to be cautious not to make some of our adult learners who are very educated and career-based feel that these questions are relevant to them. So I think we agreed that that it's easier if the questions are task oriented, so that we finish a task and then we ask something about self-reflection, in not necessarily more general, but as a general question, so that we could ask them, how did this work? I'm using a lot of newspapers and radio shows in the target language. What did you think about working on with this? Was it a good level? Do you feel that it was, help me out here, team? do you feel that it was a good way for you to learn? What could we do differently next time?
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy for connecting it to, something more work related, for the adults.
And one of my team members said that when you have students, it depends on the student. If the student, it's the first language they're learning, or if they know several languages already, then they reflect in a more advanced way.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. You could even have them compare and contrast how the learning is different between the different languages. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Does anyone else want to share anything? Gergely?
Yes, just maybe one or two things that crossed my mind while I was listening to everybody reflect. I usually noticed a pattern with not all, but many of my students, especially male students, in the past, that there are under two circumstances, they very willing and eager to reflect, even if they are subconscious about it or they are unaware of it, as one of the colleagues said it earlier, that that's what they are doing, maybe, or critical thinking or any of those concepts. One of them is usually right before or after an assessment level check-in. So I thought I would do better because of this and this. Clearly, I have to change the way how I approach it. Or once we have the chance to listen back some of those audio recordings of especially a DLS in-house mock-up tests, then it definitely gives them a chance. I usually give that as a homework. Please listen to yourself at home and think about it. Why do you think that part went easy, for the dialogue or the interview? But why did you think you struggled with, I don't know, even just the warm-up round, or what was that word, or etc. So that's usually around not just text related on a weekly or a daily basis, but also before like some major, as I said, quiz, presentation, assessment, check-in, mock-up test, etc. The other one that came to my mind just now was that when it comes to many of our students, well, I don't know if I can speak for most of us, but I had many students throughout the years who struggled with some kind of self-esteem or doubt because my language is so hard. And they said, oh, I'm never going to learn this. They were ready to throw in the towel. And then that's when we stopped being a teacher and we use pedagogy to become kind of a counselor or a therapist in a way. And usually at those moments, I've been using reflection and forcing them to self-reflect, because I say, remember back in October when I started to teach you simple past and you said, I'm never going to get this. And now it's April next year and we're using simple past like there's no tomorrow and it's no longer an issue for you. So now what I'm about to teach you, if you feel like I'm never going to get this, just think back how you used to be. What were the emotions you were going through? So yes, that's more of an invert, as you said, reflection, but also it has a projection toward the future as they reshaping their language learning patterns.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for those insights.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all. Awesome. This can, be a discussion that you can continue to think about or revisit these ideas. And, I'm sure with different students, different types of reflections are going to work well. You know, asking questions about students' learning strategies, you know, not just like their likes and dislikes, can also help to like drill down a little bit into their learning process and what they're actually doing. And yeah, if you like, you know, you can keep a record of their reflections, especially if they're written, but even if they make comments to you, write them down. You know, if you want to go back to them or refer to them with the student later, then that can be a tool. And then just to flip this concept a little bit, feel free to use any of these strategies to also reflect on your own teaching. So if you feel like doing some self-reflection, or, you know, you can think about like, oh, what went well, what didn't go well, why, you know, so these are also concepts that can be used to reflect on the process of teaching. But yeah, I hope you have gained some insights or inspiration through this webinar. And I hope there's something practical that you feel like you can use out of it. So we're going to end things there today, a little bit early. So thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it. I'll stay on a little bit longer if there's anyone that wants to discuss more, but if not, then feel free to drop off.
I just wanted to say thank you for changing the day of the webinars, because they are always Tuesday and Thursdays, and I have class. I haven't been able to be in a meeting in a while, so I was happy that, okay, Wednesday, yay, you know. So I think that, you know, it's not good for many teachers if you are teaching those same days, you know.
Sure. Yeah,
so this
thank
is
you
great.
So much for that.
Yeah, no, thank you
feedback.
for changing the day. That was good.
Sure.
Doesn't mean that I always gonna make all the meetings.
Right.
Don't get all excited.
And we're not expecting you to come to every single one. We know that people are teaching, but I think we are going to try to rotate it a little bit for that reason, so that teachers with different schedules can come. So yeah. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful rest of the day.